Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump has confirmed that the USS Gerald R. Ford will join the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Middle East. This comes as a US delegation including Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will meet Iranian officials on February 17th. Russia, China, and Iran held a new round of consultations in Vienna to discuss Iran's nuclear program. Meanwhile, the talks precede next week's International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors session. The U.S. military's Southern Command conducted its second boat strike in a week, killing 3 suspected drug smugglers in the Caribbean, as this brings the total death toll to 133 in 39 strikes. US President Donald Trump has threatened to bypass Congress and issue an executive order to enforce voter ID laws ahead of the midterm elections. The proposed law has faced strong opposition in the Senate. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has revealed that Berlin has initiated confidential talks with France regarding a European nuclear deterrent. He has stressed that the importance of rebuilding trust with the US amid global power shifts and Europe's security challenges. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Syrian Foreign Minister Assad Hassan al-Shaibani on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. The two sides discussed key domestic and regional developments, reaffirming Syria's unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. According to a statement published by the Dubai Media Office, Dubai-based giant DP World has named His Excellency Essa Kazem as chairman and Yuvraj Narayan as Group CEO after former Chair Sultan Ahmad bin Sulayem was cited thousands of times in U.S. Justice Department's files detailing frequent correspondence with Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, President Donald Trump stated that U.S.-Venezuela relations are very good and that he recognizes Delcy Rodriguez as the official president. Trump has confirmed the U.S. is working closely with Rodriguez, particularly on the oil sector. Now we start this hour with Europe. Norway's Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre has said that all ties between prominent Norwegian and late U.S. sex offender Jeffrey Epstein must be fully investigated. Støre has said voters are shocked by a flood of new documents revealing extensive contact between Epstein and the diplomats, politicians, and royalty, even as all deny any involvement in his crimes. In his strongest comments yet, Støre has said the case exposes how powerful people moved in secret walls while victims paid the price, adding that his government will do everything possible to clarify the truth. Norway's parliament has ordered a rare inquiry into foreign ministry links. Police have searched the home of former Prime Minister and the Crown Princess, who has apologized for her past friendship with Epstein. Elsewhere, U.S. House Oversight Committee has urged former British Ambassador to the United States, Lord Peter Mandelson, to answer questions in its probe into the full Epstein files. 2 Democratic lawmakers on the House Oversight Committee say it is clear Mandelson had extensive social and business ties to Epstein and holds critical information about his operations. They are asking him to sit for a transcribed interview by February 27th. The committee cannot compel his appearance, but say they are seeking his cooperation to identify Epstein's co-conspirators and enablers. While Mandelson has previously expressed regret over his association with Epstein and apologized to the victims, while denying any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, UK police have launched a criminal investigation into the claims he shared market-sensitive information, keeping pressure firmly on one of Britain's most senior political figures. Now we welcome In the Middle East, the head of global ports operator and logistics giant DP World, Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, has stepped down amid intensifying pressure over his links to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Bin Sulayem has resigned as chairman and chief executive, effective immediately after newly released files showed he appeared to have exchanged hundreds of emails with Epstein over more than a decade. There is no allegation of criminal wrongdoing against Sulayem for now, DP World says. Esa Kazem will serve as chairman with Yuvraj Narayan appointed as chief executive. The company, which operates ports across 6 continents, has faced growing scrutiny from partners and investors. Now for this, we welcome Ms. Shruti Dasgupta. She's an international relations expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ms. Dasgupta, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now looking at this, first looking at Dubai, how significant is that this Dubai's, this person has come under, he's mentioned almost 6,000 times in Jeffrey Epstein files, and what do you think UAE should do or would do to see how farther, there could be many more royal family members or other people who could be in relations with, who could be, maybe more things would come out between them and Epstein?
Well, there's no secret, Asuma, pardon me, that Epstein, despite being very, very deviant in his, some of his dealings, had the pulse of power, and he had his dealings in the economic world, in the financial world, in the political world where policies were built. So him being in touch with people who were looking for favors or wanting particular deals to be pulled off, he was the bridge between those who wanted things and those who had things to give. And in the exchange of powers, there was sometimes exchange of sexual favors, which he was very happy to provide through his divine network. Now, this entire filthy thing doesn't always have to have sexual connotations. It's just probably an exchange of favors between parties and him being the mediator. But because of his sexual misconduct and his conviction as a sex trafficker, as a person who was convicted of minor having sexual relations with minors and prostitution and all of the other charges that are there against him, that puts him in the moral, not just gray zone, black zone. So anybody who is willing to deal with him all automatically landed in the gray zone, that they were okay with his particular characteristics, his side businesses, his side interests, as long as he was able to facilitate their deals. Now that puts all these people, not just the Saudis and the Dubai people and the others, even the ones in UK, the European Union, the people in USA, anybody who was able to tap into his network was guilty by association. Whether they traded with him or not is a different question. For Mandelson, he had taken kickbacks. There is a trail of money also coming through. So that is a different level of involvement with Epstein. But people who are willing to just trade off in terms of influence with him also had to bear the stain of his particular crimes as well. Now that puts the entire world's almost, if I might say so, except for the dictators in North Korea and China, I believe. Except for those, yes, everybody else has been named and shamed in these files. So that means that this man was pretty prominent, and the people in power are very tainted. And whether we like to admit it or not, politics is a dirty business, and sometimes people have to walk these gray lines without actually actively participating in them. So people who took kickbacks, this is not an isolated incident. People who tapped into his power are not isolated. But unfortunately, there are only a few governments who are willing to actually look into it, that whether it was just tapping into his influence or something more. And while the EU and the UK are making sure people at least associated with Epstein leave their places in power, USA has been found very reluctant to do so.
Right, and as you mentioned, lots of gray zone in political sphere. So how might this expanding investigation in Norway, the US, UK how do you think this will be? Do you think this will be effective? Because of course, we know it's not going to be easy to bring these people to the light, to hold them accountable, to get them to say the things they know about Epstein, or the things they saw or they knew about him.
Well, whether you get them to spill the beans or not, there is plenty of redacted material already that are hiding a whole lot of people who perpetrated these crimes. There are people who used the now identified code words, but their emails are not available to public. Their names are blocked from public. So people who actually committed those crimes, who are still in power, are still useful to people in power. They are being protected. So there is a wall of redaction that is protecting the perpetrators themselves. The victims are hoping for conviction, but I doubt it will come through at least the regular means. Maybe social justice might be given to them, as in people who have been named and shamed would be looked down upon by the society. But I don't think other forms of justice are going to come through, because this is not a new case. He died almost 6-7 years back, and the associations are beyond that. So these are not new things. The people who have people have had time to cover up their associations, clean out their records, and any hope of actual justice, with the time that it goes on and the time that the legal system takes to actually clear out the cobwebs and find the actual truth, is going to be too late for actual justice to be delivered.
With that, I'd like to thank Ms. Dasgupta for sharing that insight with us. Thank you very much. Now we move on to US. The US military has carried out its second deadly strike on a suspected drug boat this week, killing 3 people in the Caribbean. This attack is part of Operation Southern Spear, which targets narcotics trafficking in the region. The strike comes after a similar attack earlier this week in the Eastern Pacific that resulted in 2 deaths. This brings the death toll to at least 133 in 39 strikes since the operation began. The U.S. Southern Command has confirmed the strike, saying the vessel was engaged in narco-trafficking along known routes. However, the legality of these strikes is still under scrutiny, with the Pentagon defending the operation, claiming those killed are unlawful combatants. Now we welcome Mr. Matthew Vadum. He's an American author and journalist, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vadum, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Okay.
Hi. Now looking at this, U.S. military is still carrying out these attacks on the suspected drug boats. But of course, this is not the long-term solution. Are people in U.S. okay with or supportive of these attacks as effective?
Unfortunately, people in America don't pay a lot of attention to the news. So but among those who are aware of these strikes, I think there's a core group that feels very strongly that these attacks on alleged drug boats should not be taking place. But I think most people probably look at it and think that if it's advancing the goals of the war against drugs, they're okay with it. It's the politicians and politically involved people that focus on these issues. And in Congress, there have been some efforts so far to clip the president's wings and prevent him from continuing this policy of interdicting or blowing up alleged drug-carrying vessels in off the coast of South America, but they have failed. So they may come again. Maybe if someone could produce evidence that the Pentagon incorrectly identified a drug boat and actually killed innocent people, that there might be some pressure to halt these attacks. But to the best of my knowledge, that hasn't happened. And I'm not passing judgment one way or the other. I don't know if these people are actual drug traffickers. But the Pentagon, the Defense Department, the Department of War, as it's now called, is convinced that these are criminal, evildoers, and these attacks on these ships are going to continue for the foreseeable future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vadam. Please stay with us as we have a breaking news that has come in. Now, breaking news from Bangladesh. Bangladesh's largest Islamist party, Jamaat-e-Islami, has announced that it will accept the overall outcome of the recent election, which was won by the rival Nationalist Party, BNP. Despite raising concerns earlier over the vote count, Jamaat's chief Shafiqur Rahman has issued a statement saying the party respects the rule of law. Rahman has also emphasized that while there were issues with the election process, the party recognizes the final result. Now we move on to US. US President Donald Trump is threatening to bypass Congress and impose new voting rules ahead of November's midterm elections, a move likely to trigger a major legal battle. President Trump says he will issue an executive order if lawmakers fail to pass legislation requiring photo identification and proof of citizenship to vote. He insists voter ID will be in place with or without congressional approval. The Republican-backed Save America Act has passed the House, but is expected to stall in the Senate, where Democratic support would be needed. Critics say the measures could disenfranchise millions, including young voters and minorities. Experts also warn Trump's plan could clash with the Constitution, which gives states primary control over elections, setting the stage for a possible showdown at the Supreme Court. Now we welcome back Mr. Matthew Vadam. He's an American author and journalist, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vadam, for staying with us.
Okay.
Now, looking at this, how is this perceived in U.S. among the voters? Are they afraid? Although you mentioned earlier that American people might not be watching news eagerly, and also, what do you think? What would be the long-term and short-term effects of this President Trump threatening to bypass and impose new voting rules?
I think that enough Americans are paying attention to issues regarding, voter fraud and having to present ID before voting, that they've formed an opinion on it, and polling suggests that Americans overwhelmingly favor a requirement to having to present ID in order to vote. So it is a popular proposal. President Trump's idea of imposing it by executive order will not fly because the U.S. Constitution specifically gives that authority to regulate federal elections, elections for federal candidates such as president and vice president, and Congress and so on, and meaning the House and the U.S. Senate, gives Congress, the U.S. Congress, authority to regulate these matters. So if Congress doesn't do it, it's not going to happen. President Trump issued a similar executive order last year, and I think it was promptly enjoined or blocked by the courts. A requirement that citizenship had to be proven in order to move forward with the voting registration process. So when many presidents do this, and President Trump is a big fan of issuing executive orders that are aspirational in nature, you could say. The executive order states the policy that he would like, even if he has no legal or constitutional authority to enact it. And I think that's what his threat is right now. As I said, the one last year was already blocked by the courts, and I don't see how this one would be much different. However, his hand is strengthened now because maybe you don't know this, but the Save America Act may pass the Senate. That's the one requiring that you were just talking about, that requires that citizenship be proven before someone is allowed to register to vote in federal elections in the United States. Just a few hours ago, United States Senator Susan Collins, a moderate Republican from Maine, pledged to vote for the bill. So that would give it 50 votes out of the 100 seats in the Senate. And 50 votes is all that is required because the Vice President of the United States, in the event of a tie, J.D. Vance, Republican, gets to cast a tie-breaking vote. So the vote would be 51 to 50 at a minimum. 51 votes to pass if it's actually voted upon. So the only question now is if the Senate will agree to remove the procedural hurdle. Normally, there's a rule that in major legislation, you've got to have 60 votes to proceed. It's called the cloture or the filibuster rule. And Republicans may be able to get around this rule, but that has yet to be seen. But if they can overcome this technical, parliamentary procedural rule and have a vote on it, the legislation will pass, and the president's executive order would be, superfluous. It would become the law of the land.
Thank you very much, Mr. Radom, for sharing that real-time insight with us. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. In Geneva, 2 significant diplomatic talks are scheduled. A U.S. delegation, including Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, will be meeting with Iranian officials, with Oman acting as a mediator. Later, the same delegation will engage in trilateral talks with Russia and Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has unveiled major EU support packages ahead of the anniversary of Russia's invasion. These packages aim to bolster Ukraine's military and energy sectors. Zelensky is also advocating for stricter sanctions against Russia. Furthermore, U.S. President Donald Trump has urged Ukraine to act quickly, warning that Russia is prepared to negotiate. Let's listen in.
Rounds in Abu Dhabi in trilateral format. We are advancing and we are thankful to our American friends because without Trump it is unrealistic to end this war. American side, or under the American leadership, we could achieve progress, but in parallel we need to continue pressure on Russia. And we still have instruments, we must admit this leverage. And I agree with this assessment, no signs of willingness from Russian side for serious negotiations.
The security guarantees that have been planified for 1 year by the coalition of the willing and that are ready to be deployed through the headquarters of the multilateral force Ukraine that is based in Paris. There is no alternative and credible security guarantees. So we are putting pressure on Russia. We're supporting Ukraine. We're preparing for peace and building, for the first time in our history outside of NATO, credible and robust security guarantees that will ensure, when times comes, that the aggression can never restart.
Yes, we also need to be realistic. There is no such power in this world as American power. We see that now in conflicts that have to be resolved around the world. Without US involvement and pressure, it won't work. Without US aid to our defense in a NATO context, European security is not what it is today. So with all the trials and tribulations that we're having in our transatlantic bond, and I won't deny that there are some, above all should be our aim to keep this transatlantic bond, to keep the US involved in Europe, because it's also in the US interest.
Now we welcome Ms. Shruti Dasgupta. She's an international relations expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ms. Dasgupta, for staying with us. Now, first, looking at the Iran-US talks mediated by Oman, what do you think is priority in their agenda? And of course, do you think as US ranks up their armada in Middle East, and they're also sending one more ship towards Middle East today, do you think US's patience is running low now?
Well, I don't know whether the patient's running low or not, but they're trying to increase the pressure by increasing their armada out there. But please be noting that each day this armada stands there in full ready of defense or offense, it's a multi-million-dollar exercise. So it's not a question of whether they can add another boat or not, and for how long. It means how expensive, without even firing the first bullet, a war with Iran is already proving for USA, which already has its economic issues. So the question is whether how fast they can build pressure to get Iran to sign a deal. Now, what is happening, as far as I understand, in this particular instance is that Iran is ready to talk on the nuclear points. It is also, some officials have indicated to the US officials that they're ready to decrease their enrichment program also, probably stop it as long as US allows for a consortium of power, that power supply as such, that would power all of the Gulf nations. So if they allow a consortium of nations to form in the Gulf region and they start their own nuclear programs for powering electricity, and Iran gets to have say and stake in that, then they are willing to power down their entire nuclear program. This is the only condition they are willing to talk on. What Israel wants USA to put forth to Iran is that they should also not produce the ballistic missiles, which have now proven to have more than 3,000 kilometers of range, which puts Israel directly on the bullseye board of Iran if they want it to be. And they also want other sanctions to be put on it, that if non-state actors continue to receive succor in terms of arms or cash flow, then Iran would again be penalized. And as Israel has already in the latest meeting with Netanyahu declared that it holds the right to aggravate offensive against Iran if it finds that its own security is under threat. So these are the conversation points that it is going to move around. They would like a nuclear deal signed because the IAEA does not have eyes on the 400 kilograms that was reported to be highly enriched. I believe Iran has indicated, officials of Iran have indicated in a separate study where they said that this particular enriched material could be handed over to Russia directly under the JPCO E5+1 clause. But the Iranian foreign minister, defense minister, and the other people around there, official as in ministers, have said that Iran will not power down on nuclear. They will continue to hold the right to have nuclear energy as their option, and no country in power can ever force them to bow at such a level. So while the conversation requires nuclear to be at the center of all of this, I don't think the ballistics, as Israel wants, is going to be as much a part of this conversation. The days to come, it's going to prove to be very, very tough for both Iran and USA as they decide how they want to go forth in this negotiation.
Yes, thank you for highlighting. And last but not least, looking at Ukraine and Russia and US's negotiation that's also supposed to take place. So now that US President has urged Ukraine to act quickly, warning that Russia is prepared to negotiate, what are we to make of this? Is US aligned more with Russia?
Not really, though. US is aligned only with USA, and it appears that Russia has offered a sweet deal. Though what is part of that sweet deal, or what has been exchanged in terms of favors between these two great powers, is not known publicly. It can only be guessed at from where we are sitting. Probably non-interference in US action in the Western Hemisphere, which is a pet project of Donald Trump, and that would help USA stabilize its Monroe Doctrine, the Trump corollary, or they want to call it the Donroe Doctrine. So that would be a heavy enough incentive for USA to side with Russian interests. What USA ultimately looks at is the end of this war, because of course it is expensive. It is 4 years almost now into being in action, and no end in sight, no matter how much of your money and how much of your men are you going to push into it in terms of Ukraine. So there is only so much. Ukraine is in debt up to its teeth to all the other nations with the amount of aid that has been flowing in. Some of that aid is in the form of loans. It has to pay it back. So they need the war to come to an end, and when Russia is signaling that yes, it can end, USA would definitely side with the faction that is willing to show this kind of willingness to come to the negotiating table. What Ukraine wants on the negotiating table is the billions and billions that that 200 billion actually, that Russian Russian assets are in the control of EU banks. And that is a red line that Putin does not want to have touched. Also, if EU actually ever touches those 200 billion, that would be the last 200 billion of any other nation that would be interested into European banks, because it would ensure that as long as it aligns with Western interests and policies, your money is not safe. So what Ukraine wants and what USA wants does not actually align. And that's why it turns to look more like that USA is aligning with Russia. What USA wants is access to the nuclear plant, which Zelensky is very cleverly offered, that we'll run it with you as long as it does not fall into Russia's hands. What USA wants are the minerals in the Donetsk region, which cleverly, I believe, Russia has offered, that even if that particular zone stays under Russian command or as an independent Luhansk and Luhansk territory, you can have access to extracting those critical minerals. So it's a game of who is offering more on the table for USA. Right now, what Zelensky has turned around and said is that it is very important for Donald Trump's midterm elections for Ukraine to come out as looking as a victor of this war, and for this war to come to an end. And he can make it happen if USA gives the security guarantees, which has already been given at the level of NATO, and gives particular sanctions which satisfies Ukraine. But Ukraine's greed for Russian money is something that is touching Russia's hardline, and Russian greed for Ukrainian land is touching Ukraine's hardline. So I don't see a progress unless Ukraine bends the knee.
We will be eyeing that. With always great learning from you. Thank you very much, Ms. Dasgupta, for joining us and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you. Now we move on. The Trump administration has unveiled a new maritime action plan aimed at revitalizing U.S. shipbuilding and maritime industries. The plan, which includes port fees in cargo delivered to the U.S. on Chinese-made ships, will help fund the revival of U.S. shipbuilding, which has fallen behind China and other nations. This move follows a year-long pause on levies and the U.S.-China agreed to, which were initially meant to target Chinese dominance in the global shipping market. The plan outlines several initiatives, including the creation of maritime prosperity zones, workforce reforms, expanding the U.S. fleet, and reducing regulations. U.S. Senator Todd has expressed support for the plan, calling on Congress to act swiftly to make the vision a reality. The proposed SHIPS Act, which aligns with the plan, would establish a maritime security trust fund to invest in shipyard revitalization and other infrastructure projects. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.